I'm with Dr. Royal Skousen, who is a world-class linguist and deals a lot in textual criticism. He's been working on the critical Book of Mormon project for, well over a decade anyway, isn't it, Dr. Skousen?
Oh, 22 years.
2 decades, yeah. He's basically put out just recently the wonderful text on the original Book of Mormon text, and he's been studying all the variations within what manuscripts we have of the Book of Mormon, and I believe it's 6 volumes now with the analysis and the critical text on the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, that part's done.
6 volumes and going into thousands of pages, and I was just asking you about one of the most intriguing articles, and I truly can't remember. I believe it was in one of the Farms publications where you had mentioned you had several of your students analyzing the King James Bible in various different years, I believe, and they were noting the differences in the italicized words.
Yeah.
Not all of the same words are italicized, and I know one of the criticisms about the Book of Mormon is that Joseph Smith just plagiarized from the King James, which is silly because Nephi identified Isaiah anyway. That's not plagiarism, but your research and findings on the different italicized words means that what would that mean for that type of a analysis?
Yeah.
What does that tell us?
Well, what I was trying to get the students to do was to look at Bibles printed in the United States from the late 1700s to the early 1800s to see the italics there and how they varied. And all of them had italics, and most of them are trace back to the original 1611. Italics was originally used to stand for words that weren't in the original Hebrew or Greek and that are being added by the translators. But very often, when you look at the 1611 King James, you'll find that sometimes they had words in there that should have been in italics and weren't, and eventually, typically in the 1700s in British editions, they started putting them in for those cases. There were editors that were going through trying to make it more consistent in their use of italics. In a few places they discovered they were in italics and shouldn't be, and so you tended to get a little bit removal of that. I think so one of the things which I have been trying to deal with is the role of italics that might have been used in trying to determine the Book of Mormon text. The general proposal is that where there is italics, then Joseph Smith felt free to skip those words or to replace them with completely different words. And one of the main points that my students discovered in doing their research was that the vast majority, the clear majority of differences between the King James Bible and the Book of Mormon text is not due to italics. That is, where there are changes or additional words or words dropped out. They don't, in the majority of cases, correspond to italics. So Joseph Smith is making changes, if it's him, which I don't think it really is, but if there are these changes, they're not always being associated. Most of the time, they're not being associated with italics. So there's a lot more going on. Now, one thing which I have done some more thinking about is that there does seem to be a few places where the italics has influenced the Book of Mormon text, but it's usually in these set cases where it's the be verb, the linking be verb that would be in italics in the Hebrew, in the translation of the Hebrew, because the Hebrew doesn't have the be verb.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's like, he president, or, I hear. You get Isaiah saying to the Lord when he calls him in the Hebrew and in the original text of the Book of Mormon, instead of I am here. The King James translators added am, and they put it in italics, and the same thing has now occurred. I think Joseph Smith added it in the second edition. He put the am in. And there were other ones. My hand is stretched out forth. It was stretched out forth in the original text. In the Hebrew, there's a different verbal form, and so the translators added the is, and it was put in italics, and it's missing in the original text. But 1920 edition, most of those is forms were put into the Book of Mormon text.
Oh.
So those are the two places, though, actually. There's only two places where you can sort of systematically see where maybe the Book of Mormon text corresponds with a knowledge of the italics or a knowledge of the Hebrew, which would be missing it. You can't really prove it's the italics per se, I don't think. Ultimately, I think you're really hard-pressed to say Joseph Smith is using the italics rule to do his revisions of the biblical. There are those two cases that I've identified in the Isaiah. There's really not much at all in the Matthew portions, the Sermon on the Mount 5 through 7. You're not getting really italics influence hardly at all there. In any event, it's a rather minor thing, and it doesn't explain what Joseph Smith was actually doing, if it's him.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I've come in many respects to think that it's, I believe the text was given to him word for word, so he was getting a text where those italic words are missing, whether it represents the Hebrew or whether it represents the translation is just representing that you don't need to have them. I don't know. So, I don't know.
So it's not necessarily a matter of just Joseph Smith technically having a King James Bible and just simply copying it word for word out of the King James Bible with the mistakes included, is how the critics keep putting it. And it's interesting to...
The King James Bible is the base text.
Right.
Some people say Joseph Smith, when he came to that, pulled out his Bible. I don't believe that for several reasons. One, Joseph Smith doesn't have a personal Bible yet. Of course, for the Isaiah, they're at the Whitmer home, probably, and the Whitmers could have had something, but yet there's no direct evidence, and all the translation process indicates that he has the instrument in a hat and that he's observing it and he's reading off the text. There are no papers, no books. That includes Bibles, as far as I can tell.
No.
So I believe that ultimately, if Joseph Smith could choose to use a King James text, maybe the Lord can too. I mean, why do they?
There you go.
And you can even have errors in it that are due to the original translation, that maybe it was decided, well, we're not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
We just really don't know
there is
process.
a literal word for word translation technique, but there's also isn't there a translation idea that you get the themes across? You want to get the gist of the spirit of what the text is saying.
Yeah, the King James tends to be on the more literal side.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah, the earlier translations tried to follow the original language more closely. This is why there is italics.
Sure, that makes sense.
Because the idea was we want the reader to know that we, the translators, have added words here.
Sure.
And the other hypothesis of that is that, and we're not going to delete words, because we have no way to show you we've deleted words.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
So there's no, they don't tell you, they don't put a little star there to mean we have deleted some words here, and too bad.
Yeah.
So that's an indication they really want to try and get across